Honda and Yamaha are the main protagonists in the 2026 MotoGP rider market, and yet their on-track form since that little boost of glory they both had around May time has been such that, to be honest, personally, I'm thinking, if you're trying to go to Honda or Yamaha, is your diary stuck on 2012? Do we need to help you with that? This is the Race MotoGP podcast. I'm Matt Beer, being Honda Yamaha skeptical. With me are Simon Patterson and Val Khorounzhiy to talk about Honda and Yamaha's form, wobble, dip, nosedive, however you want to look at it, but also their rider market situations. Now, we know what Honda is planning for 2026 with its 5-ish riders into 4 bikes scenario, and with the possibility of Yamaha having a total clear out of its satellite team. But let's start, before we get into who's going to end up on those bikes in 2026, let's start by how they're doing on track. Val, 2 months ago, we had Honda winning a race, admittedly in the wet, and we had Yamaha with Fabio Quartararo looking like it was on the cusp of surely winning a race, looking like Ducati's big threat. Yamaha has carried on getting the odd pole, but in terms of results, they've both had a pretty rubbish time. What's gone wrong through this last little spell of races?
Yeah, it's going to be a couple of things. I imagine. Well, three things. I think one of them is just circumstance and a bit of luck, particularly in Yamaha's case. Second would be the fact that both appear to have front-loaded their development a little bit when it comes to this part of the season, and the next big step is waiting for, let's say, the second half of the season. And it feels like while KTM and Aprilia had some issues to sort out and have finally gotten more on top of their packages, that's coincided with Honda and Yamaha sort of staying with the same package that they've maybe already reached the limit of, or so at this moment in time. So that'll be factor two. And factor three is got to be tracks, and I'm really happy because I forgot it for a second. I said three factors, and that was a huge mistake in terms of this podcast, because I cannot hold that many thoughts in my head at once. But yeah, the tracks just don't seem to have suited them particularly well, particularly Mugello and Assen. Even though Assen doesn't have the straights, both of these engines are fantastically performing. Honda's is just underpowered. Yamaha can't put the power down on the ground that it would like to. That has been the topic of its more recent sort of inline four woes, is that the power is there, it just can't really be accessed. Assen, there wasn't really that problem, but where some vibration will show up, or tire overheating or stuff like that, or those sort of long corners at Assen that were punishing the Honda, it's certain specific issues for some of them. They're obviously different bikes. We can tell that the Yamaha is qualifying very well and the Honda is not. And I think, part of that obviously is having Fabio Quartararo, but I don't think Fabio Quartararo would have been qualifying that well on the Honda, although he certainly, I think he might have been doing better than their current crop of dubious qualifiers. Yeah, it's just kind of a rough patch that's a combination of things. I don't find it particularly alarming, because it's a 2-3 race patch in the middle of a season that doesn't matter.
I think that the problem that they have is actually that that amazing 2 weeks of Le Mans and Silverstone. It set expectations way higher than they actually are. I think that their level has been fairly consistent all year, apart from the spikes, apart from the highs. The lows have been fairly steady. And I think that's a sign of where the development actually is, as opposed to the kind of glory of winning races, which both of them should have done, really, at this point. I think with that in mind, it's not a disaster. It's still pretty good. They're obviously, both manufacturers are moving in steps, where there's a big chunk of progress and then it kind of plateaus for a little bit, and there's another big chunk of progress. And like Val says, we're kind of between steps at the minute. But I mean, yeah, nothing's a disaster apart from the fact that riders always want more and more and more. And as soon as they get it, it takes a very small amount of time for a rider to kind of normalize to the bike being considerably better than it was at the race before, and for them to immediately become frustrated with it again. And I think there's an element of that coming out in the comments, where, nothing is ever going to be good enough for them unless they're winning championships. And especially when they've got two riders who have won championships before. So I think that's where we're at right now. The riders want more and more and more. Development is happening, but it can't happen instantaneously. I think that the trajectory that they're on is still really, really strong. I think, there's a very clear path within both manufacturers for what needs to come next and what's going to come next and what they need to bring. And yeah, I don't think there's anything to be alarmed about. I think it's just literally a case of it needs a bit more time.
One of the things that did get more attention, though, like you say about riders being a bit more grumpy, Fabio Quartararo kind of flicks the switch where he basically goes on a rant about his bike again after being pretty chilled for a while. Interestingly, though, we were talking about this before we started recording. There was one interview with Dorna where he really, with a smirk, but did kick off about Yamaha's long-term prospects and making the kind of comments that implied at that point he didn't have any faith in Yamaha to win a title anytime soon. I don't think you can read or listen to what he said in that particular interview any other way. But Simon, in other debriefs, did they just catch him on a particularly spiky moment or something? Because actually, in other stuff we've heard, and when you've talked to him, he sounded a bit more measured.
Fabio loves to use the media to make statements and to put pressure on Yamaha, and I think that it's calculated. None of this happens by accident. I think that he's smarter than that, and I think that's all that it is. I think he knows now and then to apply a little bit of pressure or how to apply a bit of pressure. And we know there's a lot going on at Yamaha, as we're going to go on to talk about in this podcast, and we'll never know exactly why he decided to say what he decided to say, but it could be for a myriad of reasons. It could be him just needing to remind Yamaha that they need to listen to everything that he says, which they generally do at the minute, but they might not with a few issues that we're going to come on to, and maybe it's something related to that. Or maybe it was just a bad day. Maybe it was just him being a bit dumb and a bit, bit out there, but I don't think it was. I think he's generally fairly content. He'd probably be a bit more content if he'd won at Silverstone. In fact, I think if he'd won at Silverstone, there wouldn't be any of that talk. But he didn't because the bike broke down. But I think it doesn't match with what he says. What he said to Dorna's TV cameras doesn't match with what he's saying generally to us in the much more civilized, calm media debrief sessions where things are a lot more relaxed, which is why I think there was a bit of a making a point in that.
My first read, and it's a cynical read, but it's the one I default to, is it's the first salvo in the 2027 contract negotiations. You want to keep me? Pay me. Pay me more than you think you might have to pay me, because I am at a level above of the program right now, so I'm going to demand an absolutely massive salary again, and I already earn a massive salary. And you have to pay me because he's threatening to take his ball and go somewhere to there is the problem obviously is that there's no obvious alternative, but I think still, you have to make the threat credible, and you have to, every rider has to play off, sort of weigh up that, on the one side, you want to keep your crew happy and the people working for you happy and the people working with you happy, and want to make them feel like their hard effort is being recognized. But on the other side, you don't want to make it seem like you're, too satisfied, because if they think you're too happy, they're maybe going to try to lowball you, relatively speaking, in contract negotiations. Fabio is the guy on the grid for whom this part doesn't matter at all. Like the part about keeping your staff happy and not keeping them. I made Fabio sound really harsh there, but the part about placating people who work with you and making it clear that even if the results aren't coming, their efforts are the most important thing in the world. They're always appreciated. We work together. We're one team, etc. Fabio doesn't really care about that sort of stuff so much when he talks to the media. If he feels that he is pulling his weight and the other sides of the Yamaha equation are not, he will very, very happily make it clear to media in various facets at various points of various weekends, more so than I think any other rider in MotoGP. And bless him for it. I think that's totally fine. None of this is a criticism. I think that rules. You do you, brother. Absolutely.
He's not the most money oriented rider in MotoGP, but obviously there is an element of the contract negotiations, and it made me laugh at Mugello that he basically rocked up with his new watch and his new car, which combined are worth more than some MotoGP factory riders' contracts.
Ooh.
He's now rocking a Richard Mille watch that's worth a solid 6 figures, and driving one of those new Aston Martin SUVs, the DBX.
I mean, genuinely, until you
that's
Until you mentioned that particular watch, it was news to me that watches could actually physically cost that much money. I just didn't realize that was even a thing.
Yeah.
Probably says a lot about my life as well.
The only other person I know that wears Richard Mille watches are Fernando Alonso and Mark Cavendish.
They've done all right.
So yeah. Exactly.
Yeah.
I agree on the contract negotiations thing. It feels like only yesterday that we were going, he's turned down Aprilia to stay at Yamaha. But with everything else that's moving around, with the rule change, with everyone who's sort of, it's not that people are on the market, but people are positioning themselves. And there's so much uncertainty that I'm tempted to do a 2027 rider market predictions anytime soon just to enrage Val. But there's so much going on around that. Of course, he's starting that process now. Of course, it's time for him to go, look, you haven't just got me. And he can do that with a great deal of power when he's out qualifying the other bikes of manufacturer by like 13 places sometimes. And those are 3 other Grand Prix winners, not champions admittedly, but 3 other MotoGP race winners who he's absolutely blowing away a lot of the time. Although I also feel like if you were to buy a Fabio Quartararo action figure doll, he'd come with like 3 buttons on his chest with different effects, and one of them would just be slate Yamaha for contract reasons, and the one below would be make shirt fall off. It's all the kind of the standard.
God. I was weighing up that exact joke, and I was like, I don't know if this is too much for the podcast. He just went for it, so that's very good. I'm very happy about that.
I just feel like when we record in the evening, more of this happens.
Right.
The other thing that's worth noting is that he's not the first one to publicly kick off contract negotiations, because the reigning world champion is currently debating a Honda deal that takes him through to the end of 2028.
That's true.
Yeah.
So he's not, he's not being the one that's leading the way in this by getting out in front of everyone. He's just following suit. And on others, Bagnaia has already mentioned his 2027-28 contract with Ducati and wanting to extend. Others are having these conversations right now.
100%.
And I think with regulation changes coming, there will be manufacturers that want riders signed up super early, just in case it turns out that their prototype's a disaster.
Yeah.
Yeah, but also to build your test program with certainty around that.
Also
rider
to build a bike for the rider. Yeah. No,
Yeah.
exactly. And it works both ways. That's the bit that will convince riders to sign up for deals, knowing that you then get a bike built for you. I mean, if Jorge Martin goes somewhere else, it's a pretty good reason for Marco Bezzecchi to put pen to paper on an Aprilia deal instantly if he knows he's going to be the lead rider through the development process.
Yeah, true. Last thing on Yamaha and Quartararo before we come back later to the actual wider rider market situation around Pramac there. When he's putting the bike on these poles and then basically going backwards in the races, I know not every race, I know he could have won Silverstone, I know he's hung on near the front, but generally he puts it on pole, then gets beaten up and sometimes crashes. That or doesn't put it on pole and just gets beaten up and sometimes crashes. That is his year. To what extent are those poles a sign that Yamaha has got it sorted to a degree over 1 lap pace?
I think they're an indicator that the bike is working really well within the limitations of the current inline 4.
Okay.
I think that the bike is as good as it ever was. Maybe not as good as it ever was, but the bike is still really good when it can run in clear air without having to worry about other riders and corner speed and stuff like that. It's always been really good at that, and it's back to being really good at that. But that's never going to deliver them the ability to overtake, essentially. And that's what's missing. So I think this is kind of the reality until the V4 comes of they'll be able to do pole positions. They'll be able to do the occasional Jorge Lorenzo-esque lead from start to finish win with no one else in front of him to bother him. But the rest of the time is going to be quite difficult.
No, I do think it must work its tires better for qualifying than for the starts of races. Like, it just must do in some way that I perhaps don't entirely understand, but because the difference is large. It is also true that in Quartararo's case, as in I think most riders like that, you get a bigger difference in 1 lap compared to race pace with your standard rider. So when it comes to race pace, he goes down towards the other Yamahas, which if you didn't have Quartararo in that Yamaha camp, you wouldn't really be talking about qualifying very much. I think qualifying versus race, you just say it's a garbage bike. That's all you'd say. I think there is something inherent to it because it's as good a qualifier as Quartararo is. It didn't come easy the year before, for instance.
Yeah.
So there's something to it, and for me it is a good sign. It is a positive because you'd rather the fact that there's a paradigm shift compared to last year in that regard, I think means that you're doing something, you're figuring something out. There's some important process taking place. It's a little surprising, and we'll get to it in a second. It's a little surprising that Jack Miller qualifying form has really dried up as of late, but maybe that's a little circumstantial. I'm not entirely sure. I would like to see more weekends on that one.
So Honda is, according to some of its riders, a match for Ducati in some phases of the corner, but the clear theme is that Honda just does not seem to have an engine that functions at the moment. But that's not the only problem. There's still, to me, listening to what the riders are saying, looking at the results in the dry, looking at the results at times when Johann Zarco doesn't pull off a mini miracle with whatever kind of French genes allow Fabio Quartararo to do the same. There's still so much wrong with this Honda. I just do not see signs of progress. And I feel like you two, and you're not exactly like waving Honda flags and being the massive HRC fan club, but I feel like you two see a little bit more going on here, and I just don't yet. Isn't this bike still just rubbish, basically?
I don't think so. No, I mean, well, it depends on what you mean by rubbish specifically. I think
5th out of 5 on the grid right now, I would say. Is
over the last 3 races, I would agree. Over the whole of the season, I think so, but I think there's a conversation to be had. I think it's not entirely clear cut, and I think in terms of rubbish, you could say no MotoGP bike is rubbish. You could say that, even despite how dominant Ducati is, if you look at the pure lap times, actually the relative parity is kind of impressive. Even if Ducati wins Sunday after Sunday, Saturday after Saturday, the fact is that, like in almost every motorsport category all over the world, obviously lap times generally have compressed. Every team and everybody's just getting better at executing their weekends all over the place because of the tools that are available to them, etc., etc. So in a way, none of those bikes are rubbish. In a way, all of them but the Ducati are rubbish. I don't think Honda is meaningfully more rubbish than a lot of the other bikes on the grid. And look, I've mentioned this before. I don't feel the case for the Honda being meaningfully more rubbish than the Aprilia right now, for instance. And I think the Aprilia is a pretty good bike, and the Honda is a worse bike. But I don't think it's like that much worse that you're alarmed by it necessarily. It was not good last year. I think we have to remember that, and we have to remember the feeling that even though it wasn't totally certain for me, there was a big gap to cover to Aprilia and KTM, and I don't know, Yamaha you could talk about. And I think the gap to Aprilia and KTM, a lot of it has been negated. I think that has to be acknowledged as a positive outcome, even though it's not a linear progression. I don't think it's ever going to be. I don't think you can go linear from that far back, or in a category like this. Let's see what they bring after the summer break. Let's see what they got. I don't think it's a bad bike. I don't think a hopeless bike finishes on the podium at Silverstone. Even if that race was maybe smoke and mirrors. I
mean, I don't think there's anything as a such thing as a bad bike when you look at 1 or 1.5 seconds routinely covering qualifying performance. I think that's an indicator that everything is fairly close. It's just that MotoGP is so damn tight at the minute that, some bikes can just eke out a little bit more. But I think that, if you ask me to rank the bikes in MotoGP at the minute, especially in terms of like consistency over the first half of the season so far, Ducati is number 1, Aprilia is a clear number 2, and then third is fairly competitive between the other 3. I think there's no massive standouts because they've all got their own strengths and weaknesses. But the fundamental Honda difference for me this year, the thing that has changed versus last year, is that Joan Mir is now crashing out of P6 or P7 as opposed to P14 or P15. And there is progress in that. We know why he's crashing. He knows why he's crashing. He's super, honest and upfront about the bike isn't fast enough. And every time I try to make up for the difference in the brakes, I fall off, which is kind of evidenced by all of his crashes. And I think that, all of the demands from him for a faster engine make sense. If the faster engine comes after the summer break, like probably sounds like it's going to, there's going to be a bit more of a development step from them, then suddenly he's not crashing out of P6 or P7, he's finishing P6 or P7, and things are looking I think, all right. Arguably better than Yamaha at that point.
So listening to Simon and Val's Honda arguments, part of me still goes, well, maybe this is just a case of Yamaha's got the rider that has managed to thrust it up the grid and make it look smoke and mirrors good, and Honda doesn't have that rider, and it particularly has poor qualifiers. Simon mentions the engine step that could be coming for Honda. Honda's also gone engine personnel shopping as well. I think we should touch on that first before we get into riders, because I'm just actually basically allowing you two to go, look, Honda can sign people. That's where everyone wants to go there. But yeah, who has Honda recently signed who we think could make quite a difference?
Honda have poached KTM's head of engine development, Kurt Tribe, and that's a big coup. Like he's a proper KTM factory, like career man. It's weird. Normally people like that are kept well hidden from journalists. But KTM took a load of us back a few years ago, took us to Mattighofen for the day, like 5 or 6 of us, and gave us the full tour. And we spent quite a bit of time with Kurt. So he's like the only kind of engine development guy in MotoGP that I actually know. And he is like obviously super intelligent guy, super switched on, gets racing, gets his job, gets building engines, but is very much a KTM guy. Mm-hmm. So it's a big coup for them to poach him away. It's an even bigger coup actually for me that they're moving him to Italy to basically build him a development center. By the sounds of things, that's a huge thing, because I mean, for one, because engine development has always been done in Japan. And the fact that they're now willing to let a European not just run it, but to run it from Europe, that's a really significant change. Secondly, it's going to be a big financial investment, because I've been in Kurt Tribe's workshop in Mattighofen, and there's like 6 dynos and 1 million people and computers and engineers, and it's a big operation. So to try and recreate that, which you'd imagine he's going to try and do, is a fairly substantial change. But it also, it's an ethos change. It's a mentality change within Honda, because not only are they a team that is like very traditionally Japanese in terms of engineering, under the leadership of Alberto Puig running the show, it has went from being traditionally quite an Italian Japanese team to being a very Catalan Japanese team, to the extent that a lot of people were basically cleared out when he took over. And like we're talking like hospitality staff, photographers, like a big culture change to make it more Spanish when he took over. And now we're seeing that going back the other way. We now have an Italian running the engineering program. We now have an Austrian building an R&D center in Italy. So there's a bit of a culture shift within the company. And it makes me wonder again if all the rumors about Francesco Guidotti coming into the team in some sort of a role is linked to that as well, whether or not he's going to end up running some sort of an Italian division related to the future development, because he's still kind of floating around Honda on race weekends occasionally, and there's something going on there where I think there's still some sort of a role for him. So it's a big culture shift. It's a big coup. It's a big name that they've stolen away from KTM, and it's going to take time to see results, obviously. But I don't think it's going to take as long as it did, for example, whenever Yamaha employed Luca Mammarini to do their engine development, because he's had to build 3 engines, and then Kurt Tribe only has to build 2 now. There's no V4 to suddenly start developing in the middle of all of this because Fabio says so. It's a much more kind of straight line process, and it's a good time for him to come in. You would imagine he's going to be concentrating mainly on the 850. I would imagine that there's already Honda 850. Well, I mean, I'm almost entirely certain there's already Honda 850 engines in development, because I know that other manufacturers already have their 850 engines on dynos, even if they don't have them in bikes yet. So everyone is already working in that direction, and cool. It won't fix all of Mir's problems for 2026, but it's a good sign.
Is it?
And KTM currently build the fastest engine in MotoGP.
Yeah. I mean, obviously bad news for KTM, among other bits of bad news for KTM lately. Is it a bit late? I know like the first year of a regulation cycle isn't the be all and end all, but given, like you say, other manufacturers have bikes, have 850 engines on dynos. Engines are the big the big change coming for this rule set, and other people have had their stable lineups, their stable bosses. Even if he's the right signing, this feels a bit late to change course potentially. If he gets to Honda and goes, oh no, none of that, please.
Well, we don't know when he's starting, so that's I think
this is true.
that is important because there's not been an official announcement from either party. It's been first reported by our friend Günther Wiesinger at GP1 that Honda was moving for Trieb, and then it was reported by Speedweek.com, who should know that the deal is done and he is coming.
Who Günther used to run.
Yeah. So there's very little doubt that the move is happening, but you are right. The timing is important. I think it's still whenever it happens, it's still very worthwhile, and it's not too late at all for me. We should probably talk about it if it becomes official. It's a horrible sign for KTM.
Yeah,
that was my first thought. Is like my eyes went like this, like, oh no, this cannot be. And if you connect the dots, basically, if you put 2 and 2 together, wow, this is obviously an engine is it's a part of a winning bike. It's a big part of a winning bike, and it's not all about pure top speed. It's not all about grunt. But when you hear KTM riders speak, when you hear people speak about KTM, nobody ever points to the engine as the problem. The engine's never the problem. The engine does its job. It's not only strong at the top level, it's also, there's no indication that it isn't compliant. It's a big asset of the bike. If they're losing the guy who made that, I am terrified, genuinely terrified. But that also, look, I wrote a column. I don't know when it runs. I don't know if it runs. I don't know. We have to
tomorrow or Wednesday. I don't know what's tonight. It's 8 p.m. Monday. It's not running tonight. I'm going to bed after this podcast.
Well, yeah. This is the kind of thing that shows you why Jorge Martin is trying to move to Honda. This is the point. This is the manufacturer that can make it happen. This is a manufacturer who can build, as Matt puts it, rubbish bikes year after year after year, and it still has the pull to do stuff like this. It still has the pull to go to Aprilia and take their tech genius and say, come with us. Still has the pull to take Aprilia's longest serving rider and its talisman and go, hey, be our test rider. Forget about those guys. It's like the last few years obviously matter, but they don't matter that much. This is what matters. Getting guys like Kurt Trieb matters.
It's a great statement of intent. It's a great sign. My problem, why I'm being Eeyore on this podcast, which is not my normal role compared to you two.
What's your normal role from that cast of characters?
Piglet.
I feel like Matt's
possibly.
Pooh Bear, you're Eeyore, and I'm Tigger.
Pooh Bear's, yeah. Is Pooh Bear wise? Do I want that kind of wisdom?
Yeah.
Anyway, tangent.
Do you like honey?
Yeah. In fairness, I have got a red jumper as well. Anyway,
I've ruined this episode, I think.
This is what happens when we record in the evening.
Yeah.
I love it. Anyway, Honda. My stance on Honda and Yamaha to a degree, but Honda with the shopping spree of people. Yes, absolutely. Get the people who are the best in the paddock. Yes, show you've got the resources to do that. Across all of motorsport, how many teams do we see go shopping for big names, have a ton of money behind them, and then not make it work together? The people have got to have the right relationships, the right facilities, the right freedoms to do what they want to do or not do what they want to do, the right communication. You can't just chuck the stuff in a pot and shake it and assume it's going to work. And Honda, okay, I know Honda won a bazillion titles with Marc Marquez, but they won a bazillion titles with Marc Marquez. Well, Danny Pedrosa, who is good, was not doing very much on the other bike. They won a title with Casey Stoner. They also underperformed for lots of years. They got beaten by Yamaha for lots of years. I've been a MotoGP fan for 20 years, and in that time, Honda has made it work with 2 riders, and had an awful lot of other riders have failed on Hondas because the Hondas have been difficult and the team hasn't functioned as well as it might have done. I just want to... They're doing the right things, but until those right things pay off with a tangible, and now this team functions really well and this bike has fewer flaws and it goes fast, I think you're doing it. Jorge Martin and everyone else is doing it all on hope and potential.
Can I counter that with a question of, would you rather have Kurt Trieb or not have Kurt Trieb?
Well, yes. Yes, especially if all my riders say my bike has no functioning engine and I have to try to not break for corners to make up for it. But
obviously there is no guarantee, but there's no guarantee for anybody. And that's like the only thing you can do is try to stack the odds in your favor. And I don't know that for a major regulations reset, you want to bet on tightly knit continuity on smaller budgets. I mean, maybe. Look, I'm happy to be proven wrong in 2 years' time, but
the thing for me, and we're not there yet with Honda, so I'm going to use Yamaha as an example for this, is that they've not just brought in a load of new people and said, okay, you work here now, do what you can. They've brought in a load of new people and allowed them to fundamentally change the culture of the company in order to find success. And I know what you're talking about, Matt, because I see it kind of from a bit of an outsider's perspective in F1, where like an F1 team signs someone, and then, I see it from the Davide Brivio view. Well, I see it from Alpine and Brivio, where they signed this guy that we all massively respected, and then they locked him into a path where he couldn't deviate from it.
Yeah.
Whereas Yamaha in particular, and it looks like Honda as well, have signed these guys and then said, here's your shiny new research facility, bring us something that works out of it. And do whatever you want to do it. And like much more than I ever thought a Japanese manufacturer in MotoGP would. Whenever Yamaha and Honda started signing Europeans to lead up their R&D projects, we were all like skeptical of it, because no one thought they'd be given the flexibility or the freedom to actually make it work properly. And they have. They are making it work. I think there was a bit of a sense of, the manufacturers in the past haven't used concession status properly and have kind of made that a bit of a wasted potential. And now that has changed as well, where the Japanese manufacturers are really heavily leaning on concession status to help improve. So people are working in the right direction because they've made the cultural changes as well as the staff changes. And that for me kind of bodes well. The fact that Kurt Trieb is not being told, you have to fly to Japan and work in the HRC development center to build your new engine, you can do it in Italy, is a sign that Honda are following that lead. Because at the end of the day, the lead's working for Yamaha.
And the Taka Nakagami as a bridge guy thing, I really like. And
that seems to be great move.
And that seems to be like, or at least, I mean, if you hear him say that seems to be working, obviously he's going to say that. But honestly, Taka Nakagami is the type of guy who, if it wasn't working, would have told us, I think.
He would have said nothing. But he's been enthusiastic about it. That's the difference.
I just got lost on a tangent for a while there, just thinking, how would Tigger behave on social media? And I was like, no, okay, the comparison does work. Yeah, it does. I think it'd be quite similar. Let's talk about Honda's lineup for next year. Now I'm back from that mental tangent. Simon, Honda, as far as we know, well, you've done some nice digging on this. Honda has two options for what it could do, and one of them really surprised me when you outlined it, because it's bad news for Somket Chantra potentially at a bad time when he is injured as well. But we thought whatever happens at Honda, that fourth bike, the LCR bike, Idemitsu funded, that will have a rider from the sponsor's preferred region. So Honda is trying to fit the rest of its plans into three bikes, but maybe not.
It sounds like there's a plan to keep Luca Marini at LCR. Which makes sense, because we know that he's very, very well respected and liked within Honda. We know that he's really, really good at developing bikes and being kind of an engineer's rider and giving good, high quality feedback on what's working and what's not. And Somket is, with no ill intention in the world, because I really, really like the kid. I think he's been really like welcome breath of fresh air in MotoGP, because he comes at everything completely wide-eyed and mesmerized by the fact that he's a MotoGP rider. He's just not fast enough, and there's no sign of that improving. He's consistently the slowest guy by half a second, consistently in every session. And I actually think it would be better for his career in the long run if they just moved him back to the Honda Team Asia Moto2 team and give him a chance to be there and be competitive on occasion the way that he was in the past again, instead of promoting him to a place where he's not ready for it and seeing what happens. What that looks like from a sponsorship perspective, I'm not entirely sure for LCR, although I have heard whispers that Castrol want to do basically what Red Bull have done with KTM and run all four bikes. And obviously they already run one of the bikes in the full Castrol colors basically at every race now. I think that's a permanent deal as opposed to the previous LCR like floating sponsorship things. They've the title sponsor in a way, the kind of secondary title sponsor of the factory team. So there is a bit of money now floating around from another sponsor who's not Idemitsu. And you would imagine that Honda would be able to go to Idemitsu and say, look, if you want to stay, we'll send Luca Marini to do every PR event in Asia that you want him to do because he's Valentino Rossi's brother, didn't you know? And et cetera, et cetera. And that will work to an extent, I think, because Luca also doesn't seem to mind doing random PR events where he's being flown around the world. Or all four bikes become Castro and they keep him on board if they suddenly sign Jorge Martin to take his spot. And I think that fits. That's a decent solution for everyone because no one ends up without a ride, really. They still find a way to keep Chantra in their ranks and to use him. You would imagine, he'll always be some Chantra MotoGP rider now, forever, in terms of PR. So if he's still a Honda Team Asia MotoGP rider, they can still use him in a large extent to a lot of the marketing and, and the fact that there's probably not going to be a Thai Grand Prix in the calendar next year makes that a little bit more palatable as well.
I thought Aleix Espargaro spoke really nicely about Somkjær at Assen and reminding us sort of that, circumstances is so important. Good riders can go into MotoGP and flop. It doesn't, not just, let's say, Somkjær or whatever. Guys like Tom Luthi, for instance.
Yeah.
Certified good riders. My opinion.
In fact, Somkjær Chantra has done what Tom Luthi never did and scored a MotoGP point now.
Yeah, true.
Which is wild, Luthi never scored a point in his entire season. But, and that's not knocking either, knocking him.
Of course.
It was circumstance. Yeah.
But if it's a choice between Marini and Chantra, it's Marini every day of the year, of every year. And the thing is, it's also, when I speak about Honda being an attractive destination, I think this is also one more test to prove just how serious it is about success in MotoGP. This is, if you are super, super serious about this, then you take whatever the cost is of making sure your entire lineup is up to scratch. You have to, and if it means losing Idemitsu as a primary backer of that LCR bike, then I think you have to swallow that. I currently, this year, Chantra being on that bike has not been an asset to anybody in any meaningful sporting way. Unfortunately, he's gotten hurt. He's had arm pump. It's listening to him speak. The bike just sounds too aggressive to him, for him, and you don't really hear riders talk about that so much. That he's talked about traction control quite a lot. And usually when you hear riders talk about traction control, they're talking about weaning it off. They want to have more in their hand. And with Somkjær, if I understood correctly, he's actually felt like there's not enough, that he can't handle the pure aggression of the MotoGP bike at what I presume are how you would expect conventionally a MotoGP rider to deal with that. And he needs more help from the electronics, or at least that's what it sounded like. It's hard to be sure. What isn't hard to be sure is, we all see the lap times, and they have not been up to par. Yeah. And again, no disrespect in the world, this is a really hard championship. It's not an easy bike. It's a much more compliant bike than it used to be, but it's still very complicated.
And he doesn't have the benefit of time the way that Taka Nakagami did whenever he came in with a kind of a roughly comparable Moto2 Palmer, and then a lot of time struggling before it all came together for him. Chantra just doesn't have that luxury at the minute. That's the other part of the problem for him.
I think there could be a question of, could you put in Nakagami back on the Idemitsu and just put him into the... I don't think that's what he wants. I don't think so.
No, I don't. I think that would be stupid from a sporting perspective. If you, again, this all depends on Jorge Martin making his way into the Honda camp. That creates the situation. Honestly, I think if it doesn't happen, you still have to think long and hard about the Somkjær Chantra situation and what you're going to do with it. I would not begrudge him a second season in MotoGP at all. I am not unhappy he is on the grid, and honestly, not a lot of things would make me happier than him just suddenly finding a couple of seconds. A
couple of seconds. That's the thing, though, isn't it?
It's a couple of seconds.
We're not talking about these last few tenths.
It's not me being hyperbolic. It's a couple.
It's a second.
Let's say
it's a second.
Yeah, a second.
Yeah.
My apologies. That was.
No.
I did go into hyperbole.
It's a couple of seconds on occasion. That's the thing.
Yeah.
But on average,
it's a couple of seconds to the front of the field, which the Honda is not at. For my brain was.
Part of me feels for him because there's been, like, we give Taka as an example there. this is the first time in MotoGP, certainly in the time I've been following it, but I think forever, that every bike is basically a factory bike and has to be up to a
Yes.
factory rider
Yes.
Yeah.
spec. There's no spare spaces.
There's nowhere to
anymore.
hide.
You can't be an Alex DeAngelis because you get away with it. And the weird thing is, whenever you look back at riders who have both been successful in MotoGP and who everybody loves in MotoGP, a lot of them wouldn't have cut it
No.
I agree.
in this era because they wouldn't have the luxury of time. You know, think of people like Danilo Petrucci.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, for Petrucci and for Aleix Espargaro as well, those few years on the CRT
Aleix,
bikes
the obvious,
gave them a chance to show what they could do, but they were not getting on the grid without those, actually rubbish teams existing and needing some riders who no one else would sign.
Yeah.
So yeah, the game has changed. And we do lose something in that, and maybe given enough seasons to bed himself in, Chantra would actually show what he has at his Moto2 peaks.
Like he's better than what we're seeing right now. He definitely is.
It's nowhere to hide. That's the problem. And
Yeah.
sometimes, that's how elite sports should be, I guess. But sometimes it's nice when in some championships, some people just, they get some time just to ride on the spec of bike that nobody else has. It's a 3-year-old bike or whatever. Just go learn the trade, see what you can become.
It's how professional sports work, but it's not, or it's how they should be, but it's not how a lot of them work in reality.
Yes.
You can be the weaker man in an 11-man football team and get away with it while you get up to speed, be it playing in the A's or, being on the bench and coming on or whatever. There's ways you can kind of build into it. There's none of that in MotoGP right now. None of it. You have to hit the ground running.
I'm a huge Chelsea fan. I couldn't give you the worst player in the Chelsea starting 11, but I can give you the worst rider on the MotoGP grid.
Yeah.
No, I mean, my sport apart from this is rugby, and Ireland are having the exact same thing at the minute with their 10 in rugby, where he's super talented, but he's not good enough to be starting in the team yet, and they're having to find a way to integrate him in because they need him there in the long term, and there's an element of that. Yeah.
There is a whole podcast in the way MotoGP teams identify talent, get that talent ready, and bring them through. And we will do that podcast at some point.
It's funny you say that, Matt, because I have asked someone if they'd come on the podcast next week who has a bit of experience in this.
I know. Yeah, so that's good. More on that another time. I'm gonna give you 7 seconds to answer this, because when it comes to pass as a real thing, it'll be a whole podcast in itself. But I have been thinking about this a lot as this storyline about Honda being able to fit everyone in comes together. If we're thinking Jorge Martin and Joan Mir are teammates at Factory Honda next year, Johan Zarco, Luca Marini at LCR, that is brilliant at LCR. I think that's exactly the riders you want at LCR doing that job. Fantastic. Lovely that Luca gets to keep a ride, doesn't get dropped while injured. Brilliant. Very quickly, gut feeling, Martin versus Mir on the works bikes. What's the outcome there? What does that look like?
Martin wins.
By how much? And what does it leave? Where does it leave Mir in perceptions?
By a considerable amount, and it leaves Mir in trouble.
I think Martin wins, but it doesn't leave Mir in that much trouble. Martin will out-qualify him and then finish ahead of him in races as a result, because you can't overtake in MotoGP right now. But if the 27 rules reset back to better racing, Mir then suddenly has a card in his hands again that will kind of, keep him in the... But for next year, by the end of the season, if Martin's there and once he adapts to him, he'll just out-qualify him and then just sit in front of him in races and finish in front of him in races.
That's exactly my logic. It's not because Joan Mir is some sort of scrub. He just doesn't qualify well.
It's and that's fundamentally a failure of MotoGP right now as it is.
Part of me thinks that the outcome would be that Mir will actually look much better relative to Martin than you might think on paper, and it really makes a difference to perceptions of him. But I feel like that part of me might just be the wishful thinking part that likes a good story, because I'm not sure the evidence is there based on...
Martin will do his fair share of crashing on a Honda.
Yeah.
He'll make Mir's crash record look all right by comparison.
I don't think
I'm not
that's
saying he's going to crash.
Possible. So
I don't think he's going to crash. No, I don't think he's going to crash more than him. But I think he's going to it's going to highlight how unrideable the bike can be if you're someone who's always super aggressive and on the limit, as opposed to a much more calm character like Zarco or Marini.
If you watch the Race MotoGP YouTube channel, you'll have seen a video last week where we delved into what's going on at Pramac, and we're going to bring a bit of that into the podcast now as well. We've known that Toprak Razgatlioglu is coming, which means one of Jack Miller or Miguel Oliveira is going. Now it looks like it might actually be both of them and a big clear out. Simon, what is happening here?
So I'm going to start this by saying I'm still not convinced of this, even though there's loads of rumors about it, simply because what we've seen, as we've already said, over the past 4 or 5 years at Yamaha is whatever Fabio Quartararo wants, he gets. And I don't think Fabio Quartararo wants both of the Pramac riders to get flicked off right now. But there is a rumor floating around that they want to not just replace probably Oliveira as it stands right now with Toprak, but want to replace Jack Miller with probably Diogo Moreira, Moto 2 sudden sensation, like kind of guy who's in the last 3 races kind of turned himself into a championship contender by being quite fighty and aggressive, and quite good fun to watch actually. It makes sense in a sense of what Pramac is, because he's they've said a lot about this being the junior team. It's about talent development. It's about the future of Yamaha. And then they signed 2 old hands to join it.
Yeah.
And Moreira alongside Miller or Oliveira, to me, would have been a really good signing. But Moreira alongside Toprak, who is, with no ill will in the world, who is not Yamaha's future.
For age reasons.
For age. He's going to come into MotoGP in his 30s. And there's no, he's not going to be in MotoGP for 10 years, the way that Moreira is probably going to be whenever he comes in. The way that, basically everyone who's been winning races in their second season in Moto 2 in the past has been. Because that's generally the best indicator for me of kind of MotoGP success in the junior ranks. It's if you can be immediately quick in Moto 2, you're probably going to be all right. And Moreira has been that way. So, I'm looking at people like Joan Mir, Alex Rins as the kind of benchmark for what his potential is. And that implies to me that he's got a good, long, healthy MotoGP career in front of him. But bringing him into a team that's still trying to fix their bike and to develop their bike, it doesn't make a lot of sense. Like Fabio, one of Quartararo's demands, essentially, whenever he was renegotiating his contract, was a return to 4 Yamahas in the grid.
Yeah.
With Toprak and Moreira, with 2 rookies, they're back to 2 bikes in the grid for the first 6 months of next season, while those guys learn what a MotoGP bike is. It sets back development at a really crucial time, because obviously that's also going to be whenever the engine goes from an inline 4 to a V4. And it wouldn't be a sensible decision for them to make for me. They'd be better announcing that they're signing Moreira, what Yamaha did with Jorge Lorenzo and announce that they've signed Moreira to ride the bike in 2027.
Yeah.
That would be more sensible for me, and then see where the cards land then. But right now, it's a weird call if it comes true.
Yeah, this is so. The logic, when we've talked about this before, that swung me a little bit was, and I think this might have been your logic, Val, the theory that of everyone at Yamaha at the moment, that only one guy is the future, because Miller and Oliveira have not shown enough to go, oh yeah, if Fabio Quartararo does actually not cry wolf and does leave, you're not putting Miller or Oliveira onto that bike and expecting Fabio-style performance. No. Alex Rins has not worked at Yamaha for reasons that we imagine is probably fitness-based after that Savage injury. We will get to Rins in a moment, because there have been a lot of questions about him as well. So that I think the complete clear-out theory is based on Yamaha going, well, we need to know who is our fallback to lead us, and we need to start experimenting on that front to get there. I can see the logic of that. And I think you can as well, Val. But Simon's point of, would you really do that now and suddenly have like one guy who can ride the wheels off the bike, but maybe too much in Quartararo's situation, one guy who's probably not fit, and then 2 rookies? That does seem like a sketchy way to go into a season.
Yeah, I agree. But there's also, when you watch the 3 other guys qualify like a second off weekend to weekend, you really start to pause and think, well, how much can that be really worth? What does that actually do for anybody? And I understand that there's other. It's not just about that. You can be a useful development asset, qualifying a second off. Lorenzo Savadori qualifies a second off at Aprilia, and he's a very good test rider. Clearly, it's
Test rider being the operative phrase.
test rider being the operative phrase, but you're probably not going to keep either of those guys as test riders. It's just there is probably an argument for stability. I think Moreira is. I don't know that he's a can't miss prospect, but he's a very good prospect. There's a chance. There's a chance this guy will be very, very, very useful to have under contract in the future. And there's a chance, for instance, that from what I've read, it sounds like he would agree to something like starting in 27, that he would be okay staying in Moto2 for another season. And we also can't really project his development totally from here. It is a rider who people already knew had something about him starting in Moto3, so this hasn't been like a total shock. It hasn't come out of nowhere. But we never know. Also, Sergio Garcia coming out of Moto3 wasn't a total shock when he was good in Moto2, and then he immediately stopped being good in Moto2. He's gone from the paddock now. You never know.
I never saw that coming.
By the way, there's probably some added value for somebody in Sergio Garcia in the future, whatever level that is at. Totally. I don't know, but I'm fairly.
I would imagine that with the superbike rider market that's going on, that people in that paddock are very intensely looking at him.
They should, yeah.
But they should.
But there's clearly like the world's most interesting story has happened there, and we'll hear it in 5 or 10 years time as to what exactly went on there. That's a slight Moto2 tangent. I apologize for it, but it is kind of semi-relevant.
Oh, it is. And we will do a Moto2 3 special at some point, and we are having a World Superbike special coming up as well, so we'll get around all these things. To very quickly truncate the Garcia storyline for anyone who's completely unaware of it, he was heading for Pramac this time last year. He was like top choice for that ride.
He was leading the
Moto2 championship
last year.
Yeah, didn't get the MotoGP ride. Moto2 season fell apart. Ends up now with his new team getting sacked mid-season. So he's the
same team.
Same team. Yes, same team. True. The fall from grace in 12 months is insane there, but more on that.
He was barely scoring points, so it's not like it came out of nowhere. He was well. It's complicated. It's interesting. It's complicated and it's interesting. Let's leave it at that. Just going back to Moreira and Oliveira and Miller and Rins, because we'll get to Rins in a second. It's just at a certain point, you're not getting much on the bike there. This is not my. I don't know what I would do. I think, first of all, I don't even know how I would pick. If I didn't have Toprak Razgatlioglu's contract banked, I don't know how I would go between Razgatlioglu and Moreira. There's a part of me that's very strongly thinking Moreira. I have to be honest. And it's not out of some disrespect to Toprak. It's just, it's age consideration. It's a more conventional path to MotoGP. Obviously, Razgatlioglu has achieved more in his bike career than Moreira, but like you have to think about all these things, and you have to look at the age, and you have to sort of see, you have to have a range of outcomes in your head. And I struggle to really correlate. Like for Razgatlioglu, it's this, and for Moreira, it's this. And this is great audio content. I'm sorry, this was
for
terrible.
Those of you listening, Val did 2 gestures showing a big thing and a small thing.
Yeah, so the big thing is Razgatlioglu, and the small thing is Moreira. I think because Razgatlioglu is just such a Pandora's box in terms of what you're really going to get. You could get something incredible, but you could also get a big disappointment. And I think Moreira is sort of genuinely in the middle of that, which is weird to say for a rookie. Maybe I'm wrong, but I think let's get into, this is a good. I'm going to hijack this podcast for a second. Let's all do what we would do. Let's tell the audience what our lineup would look like. Do we assume Razgatlioglu's contract is in place already? I think we should. Yeah.
And Rins can't be shifted.
Yeah. Yes, I think so.
Okay.
It's easy for me. It's keep Miller. 100% keep Miller. To go back to something you said a few minutes ago, Val, this is the reason why. You said that you've got one Yamaha who's a second ahead of the other 3 in qualifying. The fact that the other 3 are pretty close to each other is the reason why you have to keep those guys. Because you can't do what Honda did and just develop a bike for the Superman, for the superhero, for the Quartararo. You need a bit of common sense to say, wait a minute, he's pretty damn special. Let's just make sure that we're not just building something that only he can ride, because he won't be here forever. And while Alex Rins is both A, we think pretty tightly locked into a contract, and B, we don't know where he is mentally, physically, what's going on with Rins. I don't think we any of us know the full picture. While that is the case, you need to keep one of the guys at Pramac. And for me, it's Miller, because he's been the better performer, even although Oliveira's been injured and is starting to show a bit of form late, but also because it's Miller and he's got those kind of development chops.
Yeah.
I hate to be boring and agree with Simon when we've got a chance to have a complete split of opinions, but I would also go Miller for the same. Partly for he's ridden so many bikes, experience is useful, but also the peaks. The peaks are really good. The peaks are higher than we did.
Even on Yamaha. Still.
Yeah, definitely. We did a little graph in that video, and it shows like you've got some Miller peaks that are up there with Fabio's or ahead, and everyone else flat lines in the same sort of place.
That's the sole reason to keep him, isn't it? He's the only Yamaha rider who can beat Fabio. Not consistently, but he's the only Yamaha rider this year who's looked to have the match of Fabio on any occasion.
You make that point, Val, about you need to make one of you, I've just mixed you up both in my mind. You're very similar. One of you made the point about making the bike not for the superhero, but for the common MotoGP rider. Sorry, Val. Miller is your best example of being able to actually deliver with that, I would say. I know he has been peaky in himself, but Oliveira has been so peaky in his career.
I don't agree with that.
And Rins is just not easy to judge at all right now. He's not a reliable indicator of how good your bike is. I think Miller is a safer bet than Oliveira to show you how good your bike is for a normal rider.
This actually reinforced because I'm already tentatively there 50%. I think I'm getting to 60%, which is a crazy amount of percent. I think it should be Oliveira. I think I should keep Oliveira. I want to allow myself to reconsider that if he's really bad at the Sachsenring, right? So let's keep that in mind. But I think it should be Oliveira because I think, first of all, there's been not a big difference in recent rounds. Miller's qualifying a bit better, but I honestly don't really see a difference, and I think Oliveira is still climbing, whereas Miller has plateaued. But my other argument for that is I think it's better to keep the guy on the 2-year deal and not cut it just for image purposes and send the year free agent out rather than break a contract, even if you can, just because it's if it's 50-50, take the marginal image win, maybe. But my big point there is what we do know about Jack Miller is he's actually a very specific rider in terms of the picture of his performance, right? So when your rider has a very fast first 5 laps and then backwards, how do you know whether that's the bike or that's Jack Miller doing the exact same motor race he has done in all of his years
it's
in
Jack
MotoGP?
Miller.
I guess. And
every time.
So he's still a useful rider even with that consideration, but for me it is unquestionably a consideration, whereas Miguel Oliveira seems to perform like a conventional MotoGP rider. He maybe he isn't the best qualifier, but he can be sometimes. Maybe he doesn't have the most amazing race space, but he can sometimes. And I think those, like the peaks you talk about, Matt, I don't think are... I think they're just like, you can account for them better than you can account for what isn't an always every weekend peak with Jack Miller, which is that Jack Miller goes backwards in races, and you can't really assess.
It's not really
things.
a peak, is it?
Yeah, you can't.
But I just go on, Simon. Well, I'm making a noise.
I have 2 other factors, right? One is that, I don't mean this to sound harsh or mean, but it's going to sound harsh or mean, right? The people that are going to be most relieved if it's Oliveira are going to be Oliveira's orthopedic surgeon and Augusto Fernandez. Because the guy just attracts, like, he gets hurt.
Yeah.
We can statistically say that he's going to spend a relatively significant portion of a season sitting at home watching the race while Test Rider rides his bike. Because that has been his entire career, essentially. And that's horribly unfortunate because none of it is his fault. But there's a bit of that Danny Pedrosa thing where when Miguel Oliveira crashes, he gets hurt.
Yeah.
But
it should count against him to an extent
because
it's not a big enough
battle. It's not a big enough sample size because it is with other bikes. It's not like he does something to attract.
But this is my point. I don't think he does anything. It's just that every time he falls off
with other bikes, but other riders don't get hit by other bikes as much. I would argue. I think it's random.
But he has fallen off and spent quite a bit of time in the Yamaha sitting at home too.
Yeah, I
The,
don't think he's
other
injury
factor
prone necessarily. I don't know.
The other factor is that I know we're in an era now where MotoGP is super competitive, and things that in the past were not necessarily that were a factor in the past aren't necessarily a factor now. But commercially,
Yeah, fair
Miller
enough.
makes more sense,
Well,
both because he's Jack Miller and because he's an Australian rider at a time when that is a struggling market, and no one in MotoGP really cares about the Portuguese market the way they care about the Australian market, or by extension, the British market, because Jack Miller has kind of become, he's the grid's only native English speaker.
oh, it's harsh on
way.
Brad Binder. I didn't realize
that. He isn't. But Brad, I mean, the fact that I forgot about Brad says a lot about Brad's
His
media
season.
appearances, doesn't it?
Yeah, well, okay.
It's he's so quiet that there is, what I was trying to say, and what is less harsh to Brad, is that Miller has taken over from Cal Crutchlow. He's the loud, outspoken English speaker who appeals to British, American, Australian fans. And I think that commercially there's a bit of a need for something like that, especially going into a Liberty era. And also Jack Miller versus Toprak as teammates is going to be like, it's going to be like having a round of the World Stunt Championship every weekend, just leaving and entering the garage.
That could be quite fun, couldn't it?
It could be quite fun.
Here's my perfect solution. That's ideal. You call Fabio Quartararo into the office. You give him, you show him 3 photos. One's Oliveira, one's Miller, one's Augusto Fernandez. Because I think, honestly, Augusto Fernandez kind of deserves to be in the conversation. I think, sort of. And you just tell him, hey, which of these guys do you trust the most as in weekend feedback and stuff? Pick one of them and let's go home.
There's a problem with this. It's whenever Fabio chooses Dovi.
Well, that's how, you know what? I was going to make that exact joke, and then I thought, actually, I think Fabio would prefer Dovi just not to ride, but to sit in his corner all weekend. And
just make suggestions. Yeah. I think in the end, the problem here, and this is such a non-answer in a way, but the problem here is it has become a case of now or never with Toprak and Yamaha. People at Yamaha who'd worked with him before could not allow it to become never. So it had to be now. And now is actually a rubbish time to do it because it is too late in his career for him to be the future of a manufacturer. And Yamaha needs someone to be its future as well as its dependable person. So it's ended up with this jigsaw, but it's gone, we must get Toprak. If we don't do it now, it will be too late. Regulation change, Pirelli, there's reasons, let's just do it. And then it's like, and now what else do we do to balance that lineup around that? Because I've got a lot of time for Miller. I think Miller's peaks, the fact he came in was doing Fabio beating times on Yamaha like that. It's like the talent, make that talent not fall back in a race, make that talent do it more regularly and not disappear for a few rounds at a time. But the ability in Miller is so high that, and I still have faith in that. But this is an imperfect lineup. And where we talked about Honda kind of getting to a point where actually, if you've got Martin and Mir on your works bikes and you've got Marini and Zarco on your satellites, you're pretty well set for some raw pace, some great racecraft, and some great development. And Yamaha is carrying an injury, some uncertainties, the guy from next door who might be amazing but might not get this bike, and a superhero who keeps saying he might want to leave. It's not a tidy jigsaw in the end. When we did the video, so many of the comments on both Patreon and on YouTube were around the fact that Rins is still occupying that seat despite his performances being not great. Obviously, we talked about how Yamaha is not going to break that contract. Rins is not going to break that contract himself. But are we at a point where one of them should?
Yes.
Yeah, probably.
Yes, and I mean, yes, because what a terrible answer. I'm so sorry. I don't know how to put this because it's a purely guttural emotional response of, I don't actually think it particularly massively makes sense for either party to cut ties here, but I don't like this and I want it to stop. So if maybe you guys, and by you guys I mean Yamaha and Alex Rins, feel the same way that this sucks, I don't want to watch this anymore, let's all just agree to do something different somehow. So Alex Rins has had a head start on both Miguel Oliveira and Jack Miller. He has not been meaningfully different in performance to either of them this season. If people see signs of progress from him, I do not. Not anything that falls outside of the realm of noise for me, like just general statistical noise. Maybe I'm wrong.
Skewed by massively towed qualifying laps.
Yes, which I'm a hater when it comes to that. I think towing in qualifying should somehow be banned because it disrupts the purity of the experiment. I want to know who's fast over one lap. I don't want to know who's smartest in finding a toe. I realize this is an unpopular opinion, and it's
slightly controversial in motorsport.
just a little bit. Let's just do single lap shootouts for an hour. The most
Oh,
boring.
if you go back to mid-naughty superbikes, Val, have fun there.
But it's just, I don't see the light at the end of the tunnel. There's not even like a clear issue, because it's like every part of the game isn't quite where it should be. So you're not like, it's not like just improve qualifying, just improve race pace, just improve this, just improve that, just improve start of the race, just improve end of the race. He's like, every weekend it's the same and yet somehow different in what's lacking, but something is always lacking. For a fantastic rider, a great rider who should have been a perfect match for this team and for this bike, and it never ever happened, and I don't believe that it will. Let's fix this all together. Let's buy one of those Suzukis. One of those Suzukis that
he has one.
Okay, yeah. Well, wheel it out.
Yeah,
he has one in his gym at home.
Let's do that.
Why have we not done this?
And we will find out. Everybody will instantly know. Okay, either like his body just doesn't work as well anymore, or actually it's just a total mismatch with the M1, etc. And if it's the latter, then let's wait for the V4. If it's the former, then let's consider some other career options. Now, I say that this is all very condescending. Alex Rins is a free human being to exercise his labor rights, and he deserves to see out the contract that he signed that Yamaha offered him. And if he wants to stay in MotoGP on this bike, he should try to do so. But I think I don't like watching this from weekend to weekend. I think this is also a fair thing to say.
I'm basically at the point now where I really like Alex Rins and want to see him do well is being counterbalanced by the please God make it stop, because I don't like seeing Alex Rins do this badly.
No,
and I've been like, I don't want Rins to disappear off the grid, because I think he's super talented. He's a nice guy. He's a good person to have in MotoGP, but I don't want to see him suffering like this either. And I want it to stop, and I hope that the V4 makes it stop, because otherwise, I mean,
it's just
he doesn't, unless he finds something on the V4, he doesn't stay in MotoGP beyond 26.
No, totally,
because there's no way these performances warrant that.
No, as much as every rider who there's a question mark over, you want to just go and give a little half season on the Gresini Ducati just to make sure. Of course, that would solve so many problems if you had that as your benchmark test. And okay, they're all right.
But you know who I want to give a half season on the Gresini Ducati? Yes, you do. Let's not continue with this.
Is it Pecco Bagnaia?
No, not particularly.
Because I think if you put him in the Gresini Ducati for the second half of the season, he'd probably be suddenly quite back to
It's Maverick Vinales who apparently revealed that he nearly signed with Ducati. He nearly signed with we nearly had Vinales.
Stop the podcast.
How?
Just let him be the top KTM. Just
why did we not get Vinales? I want to know. I just want to know. It's if I ever,
Val, we don't have enough hours in the day to explain why Maverick Vinales makes the decisions he makes.
The sci-fi stuff.
I can see the moon out of my window, Val.
The sci-fi stuff where there's like all-knowing beings, and maybe you can ask him like one question or something. Maybe this would be my question. Well, how would Vinales go on the Ducati? This is what I
think that somewhere in the multiverse, he's a world champion on a Ducati.
Yeah, I also saw Doctor Strange 2, and I remember that scene. It's a good scene.
There's 14 million possible connotations, and only one of them is Maverick the World. You were given your chance to stop, Matt.
That's fantastic.
I let you carry on. No, let's stop the podcast. You two are on a road trip to Sachsenring this weekend, so whatever happens there is nothing to do with me.
I've just had an idea about that I was going to talk about afterwards. We're not going to talk about it now. I think we should do videos to the Patreon with the Insta360 in the car on the way home from the circuit in the evenings.
Absolutely.
Good.
Absolutely. Speaking of Insta360, you want to win a Marc Marquez signed camera? Have a look at the link in our description on this episode. And look forward, if you're part of the Members Club, look forward to 360-degree glory of Simon and Val in a car on their road trips to and from the circuit this weekend.
I already have a very, very good Doctor Strange quote for Vinales in my head, but I'm not going to use it because nobody is pop culture deep.
End the podcast.
Ending the podcast. Podcast over.